Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Geneva for the Conservative Voice WTO election extravaganza special. It's just getting dark here. It's a beautiful, warm evening in Geneva. Not that I've seen the outside, because I just crossed my 130th bilateral by Zoom and by Teams today. So it's been it's a real pleasure to repeat it all over again tonight. I thought I'd begin by, people will say to me, what on earth does the World Trade Organization actually do? Why does the election matter? And why has Britain got a candidate in this race? And all legitimate questions. So, first of all, the WTO was set up in 1995. It came following the successful completion of the Uruguay trade round. It was to herald a bright new dawn in global trading relations. It had three basic functions. One is to facilitate trade, to make sure that trade flows more freely around the globe. The second was to introduce a dispute resolution mechanism. In other words, there was an agreement that whatever decisions were made here were binding, and that the smallest countries would be treated equitably with the largest, equally with the largest, and then, of course, that there would be negotiations for future liberalization. In effect, very little of that has happened. There's not been a single new multilateral liberalizing trade agreement in 25 years, except for what's called the Trade Facilitation Agreement in 2013, but effectively nothing substantial. The Doha round, which was to set the scene for this bright new future, had three aims: to liberalize agriculture, including getting rid of distortive subsidies like the CAP. Secondly, to remove tariffs on non-agricultural goods. And thirdly, to liberalize services. And it all came with the theme of sustainable development. Here we are, 2 decades later. We've still not concluded the agricultural negotiations. The services negotiation sits in complete limbo, and there's been limited progress on liberalizing tariffs. So all very disappointing and very frustrating, which is one of the reasons why the last Director General, Roberto Azevedo from Brazil, stood down a year early. And that has left us with an unexpected election. We thought long and hard about whether we should have a British candidate so soon after Brexit fighting in this election, but the Prime Minister and I agreed that we actually needed to take the opportunity to set out Britain's stall in the glare of publicity in capitals around the world that this particular election attracts over a period of 3 to 4 months, which is how long it actually takes for this election to happen. Well, election, I'll come back to that in a moment. We thought it was worth setting out our reform of WTO, not because it's a great part of what Britain must do post-Brexit, but because it was necessary in itself. And we believed there were major problems and that we had some solutions that we should take forward. The EU was going to have a candidate. That candidate was later to stand down, as you know, as the European Commissioner. And it ends up there is no European candidate except the UK. There is no developed country candidate in this election but the UK. There's no Western country in this election but the UK. And so that provides a lot of dilemmas, which you can imagine, for a lot of our European colleagues in particular. How is this election conducted? Well, this is something of a revelation. This process is a cross between selecting a pope and the Eurovision Song Contest in terms of the mechanics that are deployed. Winning the most votes doesn't win you the election necessarily in this process. This is a consensus-based organization. So if, for example, you're an African candidate and you win all 58 African votes, but you don't win votes in Asia or the Americas or Europe, that won't be enough to get you across the line. You've actually got to show that you've got support in all the regions of the world, across the developed and developing worlds, East and West, North and South. So the spread of support that you can get is key. So simple numbers won't win it for you. So the art is getting as many votes as you can from as many different places. as possible. Do they all count the same? Actually not, because the US can't count as one vote, obviously, given it's the biggest economy in the world. And so there are accepted that there are 5 vetoes. 5 countries can play their veto against you: the United States, the European Union, Brazil, India, and China. So we reached the first round of voting, or decision making. It's called the confessionaries. There are 8 candidates, and every country can vote for 4 for the first round. And they go in one by one to what's called the Troika, the 3 deputy director generals, and they say which countries they're going to vote for. And then they take them all away and see which candidates have got the widest and the most support. They'll go through to the next round. And then we get round by November to the final 2. We think that's assuming vetoes don't get played, blocks don't get made. For example, where the Chinese to play a veto, the US might play a veto in return. India might decide to join in the fun. And there's no guarantee that we will get to the date, which is meant to be around the 7th of November. So if you thought that any of the internal processes you've ever imagined were complex, well, this one will take it several stages further. We've got the candidates. We've got a Nigerian candidate. We've got a Kenyan candidate. We've got an Egyptian candidate, ourselves, a Mexican, the Saudi Arabian, South Korean, and the Moldovan candidate. There is more horse trading going on here than you would get in a Genghis Khan camp. So it's all making for an interesting time. What are we finding? We're finding that UK support is higher than we might have expected at this point from surprising quarters. So we've already got support publicly, and we've got some support privately. Support publicly from Australia, from Ukraine, the Maldives, Malta, Romania, Honduras, El Salvador, Paraguay, Colombia, a whole host of African states, many more than we might have expected, from Tunisia, from Chad, from Cameroon, and in Europe. We're looking at a whole range of countries who might and might not support us, but some of them are teetering very much towards us. And next week I shall be in Rome, Berlin, Prague, and Budapest, where we've got a good chance of capturing those. If we got all 4 of those, we're in a very good place with the European Union. And last night we had a big surprise because Belgium decided to call us up and say they would like to campaign for us. Was there anything they could do with other countries to lobby for us? And given that they weren't even in the top half of our European Union expectations, that was a bit of a surprise. So the whole thing has been a very topsy-turvy race. It's thought by those who know that the 2 African candidates are probably the favourites, but it's very clear also that a number of the least developed countries don't want to vote for a developed African country and would rather vote for the United Kingdom, who they see as a big power, able to hold our own with the other G7 countries, but also with a great record on development through DFID, through the Commonwealth links that we have, and through our Aid for Trade program. So huge amounts going on there. What are the issues? The issues are the WTO itself. My argument and our campaign is centered around that the WTO has got great expertise in Geneva, it's got great people, it's got a great institutional memory, but it's got zilch political clout when it comes to capitals around the world and being able to make the case. So the consequence is that some of the other global institutions like the World Bank and the IMF, I think, are held in higher esteem than the WTO, which used to be the #1 institution when it was created. So getting its prestige back is important. And my pitch is that as the only elected politician in this race, I can bring the leadership, the experience, and the international clout from a long time in British politics with me. We are a G7 country, one of the world's biggest economies, the 5th biggest economy in the world, but also one of the world's biggest development donors, which puts us in a quite unique position. So the debate has been very interesting around that. We are also staunch supporters of a multilateral rules-based trading system. because we believe that's the best way to spread prosperity around the world and to allow people to trade their way out of poverty. And we should make the point that we've taken 1 billion people out of extreme poverty in the past 25 years, one of the greatest achievements, I think, in human history. And we're pushing that, and I'm unashamedly the free trade candidate. Some others seem afraid to make the case for free trade. I believe that the whole point of the WTO and the free trading system is to allow the concept of comparative advantage in economics to operate as freely as possible. And I believe, and I've said in my literature here, that I believe trade is a right. It's your right to sell your goods and services and your labor at whatever price you think to whoever you want. And it's your right as a consumer to buy whatever you want at a price you're willing to pay without interference from anyone distorting the market. And you'd have thought I was the first person to say this since Adam Smith and Co. Here, because people have shied away from some of those debates. What's very interesting is how much of a chord it strikes. The Tunisian Perm rep here, who used to be a member of the Tunisian government, was saying today it was great that someone actually made the case for what we're meant to be. The WTO is about trade. Of course, it has overlaps with other institutions on development and on climate change issues and so on. But we have to remember who we are and who we're not. We are not UNCTAD, we are not the Security Council, we are not the UN, and we have to stop bilateral issues between members in other spheres like security spilling over into trade, or we will get more distortions in the system. So that's our basic pitch. If those things were important normally, they will be more important post-COVID. And one of the decisions that Boris and I took was that the situation was pretty grim now, but it would be more grim after COVID if we didn't take the appropriate measures. And on that case for free trade, there are some countries in the COVID emergency who will see sanctuary in some form of protectionism. They will see that their resilience, they believe, will be better if they do more onshoring and they do more import substitution. My belief, classic free market belief, is our strength lies in diversity of supply. The more diversity of supply is out there, the less we're dependent on any one particular part of the globe, and the more security and resilience we get from that. And herein lies this big debate. This is a huge global debate on the value of free trade. If we win it and we open up the global economy, then we might avert what might be a humanitarian crisis in terms of foodstuffs, which may be coming after COVID, because there was less sowing, there'll be less harvesting this year, and we could have a major shortage if we don't have an open market. If we do that, if we get that situation, we actually may have created again or averted a major problem and open the gateways to a much more liberal free trading future. If we don't, and we get a rise of protectionism, that could herald a very bad period indeed, not just economically, but in terms of politics, international relations, and security. As I said this morning, for global trade, COVID could be the kiss of life, or it could be the kiss of death. It depends which course we choose to take. We're also proposing, which I won't bore you with, technical internal reforms at the WTO to actually make it much more representative of the different levels of development across the world, and also to send a very strong signal that we believe that empowerment of women in commerce is a key issue. There are lots of women around the world who feel utterly disempowered, which is why I said that half of my top team will be women. That's basically the 4 deputy director generals, because all the studies, as I noted when I went back to my book, Rising Tides, which I wrote now 7 years ago, and went back to the notes on that, all the studies show that where you can bring more women into economic activity, not only is it beneficial economically, it is a socially empowering tool, and countries where there is a higher number of women involved economically are politically more stable and less likely to be involved in external conflict. So there is a payoff right across the board for this agenda, and interestingly, I'm the only candidate who's made such a pledge in the campaign. And finally, as well as being able to, I believe, bring the United States back to the dispute resolution body, which they've been standing back from, because we might go into in questions, how do we do that? But finally, I think that we've made this link, and it's my time as Defence Secretary as well as Trade Secretary made me aware of the linkages between them, and we say that trade is a bridge between prosperity and security. Why? Because trade's not an end in itself. It's a means by which we spread and create prosperity. Prosperity underpins social cohesion. Social cohesion underpins political stability, and political stability is the building block of collective security. In other words, in the era of interdependency and interconnectivity in which we live today, you cannot apply protectionism without unwanted consequences. If you don't give people the chance in an open trading system to trade their way out of poverty, then don't be surprised if you end up with more mass migration, more radicalization, and more failing states that draw us into security situations against our will. So I think we've set out a broad intellectual and practical agenda for the organization that deals with the conceptual, the organizational, and the policy. It's interesting the way that from a total standing start, most of the candidates have been in this race for 6 months. Our nomination papers went in 20 minutes before the closing deadline. And we've come from a dead standing start to, I think, what people now regard as one of the stronger campaigns in this election. So, whatever else it may be, boring, it is not.